Over 100 years ago, eugenicist social planners said that they'd use mind-altering drugs to control the population. By 2007, more than 20% of the U.S. population were on some type of prescription antidepressant. But in the case of foster children, a sector where the state has total control, at least 2/3 are forced to take a cocktail made up of, on average, 7 psychotropic drugs. Chairman of the Texas Society of Psychiatric Physicians, Joe Burkett, testified before the State House Select Committee hearing on psychotropic drugs in foster care and shocked the public when he said that 2/3 of foster children in Texas had been placed on psychiatric drugs because they were very, very sick from a bad gene pool. The Western world is now implementing eugenics pre-crime policies. Fetuses are now being pre-screened according to family histories of crime. From Portland, Oregon to London, England, Child Protective Services are enrolling newborn children into criminal databases at birth and forcing them to attend probation hearings at age 2. The overlords of scientific dictatorship are ruthlessly prosecuting a war on our most defenseless.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
The Kissinger-authored U.S. plan targeted 13 key countries where massive population reduction was called for. Kissinger recommended that IMF and World Bank loans be given on condition that nations initiate aggressive population control programs, such as sterilization. Kissinger also recommended that food be used as a weapon, and that instigating wars was also a helpful tool in reducing population. In 1972, the Nixon White House also implemented a eugenics policy which was directed by George Herbert Walker Bush, then United States Ambassador to the United Nations. Bush advised China on the formulation of their one-child policy and directed the federal government to forcibly sterilize more than 40% of Native American women on reservations.
In the 1870s, the federal government, partly in order to meet its obligations to educate Aboriginal children, began to play a role in the development and administration of these schools. 2 primary objectives of the residential school system were to remove and isolate children from the influence of their home, families, traditions, and cultures, and to assimilate them into the dominant culture. These objectives were based on the assumption that Aboriginal cultures and spiritual beliefs were inferior and unequal. Indeed, some sought, as was infamously said, to kill the Indian in the child. Today, we recognize that this policy of assimilation was wrong, has caused great harm, and has no place.
des Autochtones de la communauté algonquine de Lac-Simon en Abitibi-Témiscamingue qui dénoncent vraiment l'attitude de la Direction de la protection de la jeunesse, la DPJ dans leur communauté. En fait, Claude, on a même bloqué l'accès des gens de la DPJ à la communauté.
Effectivement. Donc, depuis lundi, il y a une quinzaine de grands-parents qui ont décidé de bloquer l'accès aux travailleurs du centre jeunesse de l'Abitibi-Témiscamingue. À 3 reprises, ils l'ont fait. Et ce qu'ils dénoncent, c'est l'attitude de la Direction de la protection de la jeunesse. Ils disent qu'il y a trop de signalements, que les enfants sont retirés beaucoup trop tôt des familles lorsque c'est le cas. Actuellement, à Lac-Simon, il y a une 60aine d'enfants qui ont été retirés de leur famille, mais qui sont toujours sur la communauté chez des proches. Mais il y en a une trentaine qui, eux, ont été retirés et qui sont à l'extérieur et en majorité chez des Blancs. Mais au-delà de tout ça, c'est le fossé culturel entre les Autochtones et les intervenants de la DPJ qui a été dénoncé. Voici une manifestante.
Mais dans la communauté, oui, on a des problèmes sociaux, je suis au courant. Je ne cache pas qu'il y a des problèmes sociaux dans la communauté. Mais c'est ça qu'ils utilisent ici, la DPJ. Ils utilisent les problèmes sociaux qu'on vit, que les parents vivent dans la communauté. C'est avec ça qu'ils ont du pouvoir au tribunal, dans nos familles puis au tribunal. Ils utilisent l'honnêteté des parents. Les parents ici là, sont bien honnêtes, sont capables de dire la vérité, mais ils utilisent cette vérité-là.
Bon, alors de toute évidence, il y a une impasse. Alors qu'est-ce que le centre de jeunesse fait pour dénouer cette crise-là?
Alors, il y a 2 rencontres qui ont déjà eu lieu sur la communauté. Il y a un plan d'action qui a été proposé par le Centre jeunesse. Et le Centre jeunesse dit qu'il fait beaucoup d'efforts pour adapter ses politiques. Voici un des porte-paroles.
C'est sûr que mardi, on a entendu des gens insatisfaits. Nous, on sait à l'interne qu'on a aussi des gens satisfaits des services. Et s'il faut, effectivement, compte tenu de la situation actuelle, quand on dit qu'on est prêt à s'asseoir et à mettre ça par écrit, s'il y a des choses qu'il faut améliorer puis qui ont peut-être été échappées, bien, on va les rattraper.
Alors, on sait que ce matin, l'intention des Autochtones était de maintenir le blocus jusqu'à ce qu'ils aient un plan d'action par écrit et jusqu'à ce que tous les intervenants du Centre jeunesse aient été avisés par leur direction de la situation.
Ouais, des situations qu'on retrouve et qu'on voit ailleurs, comme ça au Canada, c'est pas tout à fait unique, mais bon, c'est une réalité. Merci beaucoup, Claude.
We're talking about children that were tortured, that were kidnapped, that were put into cells, that had to take tons of experimental drugs, chained and whipped. The Quebec hospitals were under the rule of the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, and the CIA. The Duplessis orphans were used as human guinea pigs for medical experimentations. The Duplessis orphans case is a Canadian genocide. More than 100,000 Duplessis orphans have disappeared or murdered. Innocent children were falsely labeled mentally retarded and illegally warehoused into psychiatric hospitals.
Puis là, quand ça, la religieuse, le soir, elle m'a embarqué dans un bain de l'eau glacée. Puis après ça, elle m'a mis la camisole de force. Encore, je pleurais trop pour ma mère. Je voulais m'en aller chez nous. C'est pour ça qu'ils m'ont torturée. Puis quand c'est sorti à la télévision, j'ai dit à mon mari, il faut que je leur dise à mes enfants. Parce qu'ils vont dire, ma mère a été dans une psychiatrie, ça n'a pas de bon sens.
Every time that something came up that in the newspapers or television, it turns always into a massive cover-up. One lawyer told me scandal must come from beyond the province of Quebec, because he said everybody here is rotten to the core. The corruption is so high.
Moi, j'ai rentré à l'âge de 11 ans, je suis sortie là à 17 ans et demi, c'est grâce à ma sœur qui a déserté, qui a pu me sortir de là à l'hôpital psychiatrique. Ben, c'est là que j'étais contente de sortir de là. Je n'étais plus capable. J'avais trop de souffrance, je souffrais trop.
They don't want you to know the truth, and I guess they're good at hiding it.
The potential for abuse is enormous because of the way the thing is set up.
Agencies are funded by how many children they have in care. And if the number of children decrease, they get less funding.
We are making money.
They get all this money from the government from donations, and they're using it to protect themselves, not the children.
Almost every single child was on a neuroleptic.
A very clear example of empire building.
Thunder Bay is benefiting big time with our kids in care. I don't know how many mortgages they're paying.
This baby snatching system became a big business only in the last couple of decades.
Well, I think the disconnect is in the history.
Especially in the Jewish community, because people don't know that this is going on. People find it so hard to believe that a Children's Aid Society could act maliciously. It just goes outside of what people believe.
Even though we were the adoptive parents who were supposedly going to adopt this child,
you didn't protect me. You're supposed to.
I would certainly expect that our police today respond.
In child welfare, you actually have more power than the police.
There are no other government agencies that have those types of powers.
There's an imbalance of power from the word go.
Confidential is actually code for secret. We'd like to keep it a secret.
They're conducting themselves against the law.
Tell government, when are you going to wait for another boarding school before all these kids come of age and start having lawsuits with them? Is that what they're waiting for?
Be bold. Be a leader from time to time, for God's sake. Do something.
We call them Cheyawish, that means the devil work is what they're doing.